My name is Kelsey Mann, and I am the director of Inside Out 2.
How did you start your career in animation?
Boy, I started where a lot of us at Pixar started, drawing in the margins of my school notebooks. I kind of always grew up loving drawing and loving movies. And as I started to enter college, I was thinking maybe I can make a career out of this, work in film. And I was always known as the kid who could draw. So I'm like, well, maybe I go into animation, because this industry is pretty competitive, and that's the thing I can compete with other people. I was, the kid that could draw. So I started to go into animation. I went to a school called Northern Michigan University. I'm originally from Minnesota, and went to school in Michigan, and ended up getting a degree in illustration. I got my BFA in illustration. I wanted to work at Disney at the time, and it was all about drawing skills to get into Disney. So I went into illustration to really get strong drawing skills. But I didn't really learn film and animation at college. It wasn't until I graduated that I started to work in the industry. I worked at a commercial studio in Minneapolis. And that was really great because there's not a lot of people at a small studio. And so you get to wear different hats. And so I got to learn a lot of different things between, in-betweening and animation and background design. And I did a whole bunch of stuff. I started out as the intern, so I was buying the toilet paper. That was my first gig, but I slowly started to do more and more. And so I worked there for a couple of years after I graduated, and eventually became a director there at the studio. And then I applied to Pixar in 2000, and I did not get accepted. So I thought, what do I do? And my wife and I decided to move to LA, and I would try to work on my stuff and try to get better so I could reapply again. So we moved to LA, and I worked in LA for many years, like 8. I think I was down there for 8 years, working in. I did a lot of like small stuff again, like little internet animation, using Flash. But then I got into Cartoon Network, and that's where I found storyboarding. And that was kind of my first big breakthrough, was getting a job there. And I worked there for about 5 years, off and on different shows, and got to direct a bunch of shorts. And I was finally able to get a portfolio that I was felt was stronger, and I was ready to apply to Pixar, but they weren't hiring at the time. But a friend of mine was working over at Skywalker Ranch, and he was working on the Clone Wars TV series, and so I went to go visit him for lunch, and they were hiring. So I gave my portfolio to Lucasfilm Animation, and I got a job on Clone Wars as a 3D story artist. And so I did that for a year, and I just kept checking the website for Pixar for an opening for a story artist. And lo and behold, one day a spot opened up, and I applied, and it took a long time for them to even call me. It took 5 months from when I turned my portfolio in to getting a phone call. And it took a month to do the interview process, but I eventually turned that original rejection letter into an acceptance letter, but it was 10 years later.
How did you approach directing the sequel to Inside Out, a much loved and successful film?
I approached it with a lot of excitement and joy. I think I made a conscious effort to make sure that my own joy was driving at my console while I was making this movie, because I never thought I'd ever direct a movie at Pixar. As I was telling you, it took me 10 years just to get in here as a story artist. So I never thought in a million years I'd ever direct a movie here. And it's funny looking back on it, that kind of windy road of being outside the studio that led me to here. I think it gave me a lot of leadership skills when I started here, because I had been in the industry and had done a lot. lots of different things, but it gave me, I wasn't just fresh out of college. I think my life would have been different if I would have gotten an acceptance letter straight out of college. And I don't know, maybe I would be directing. Who knows? There's the sliding doors kind of like aspect to it. I don't know what that version of Kelsey would be like, but this one, I'm happy for this version because it led me to direct this movie. And there's a lot of pressure, obviously, for directing any movie at Pixar. We have very high standards, and the world has very high standards of what a Pixar film should be. But I think it was dialed up even more when you're following up a film, as you said, is very beloved. Not only outside in the world, but also inside. Like we're as big of a fan as everybody else of that film. So following it up was a lot of pressure, but what an opportunity. So I wanted to make sure that my joy was driving making this movie, because I really believe that what you feel, you set the tone, especially as the director and a leader on a movie. You set the tone for the rest of the crew. And if I'm having fun, hopefully they can have fun. And then that fun will end up on the screen.
How did the idea for the film come about?
When I first started, it was kind of wide open. Pete Docter, he directed the original film. He's our chief creative officer. He, when he first asked me to do this, he's told me he didn't have an idea, but he thought I'd be a good person to go off and think of an idea. And so I kind of could go wherever I wanted with the story. But I rewatched the first film, and I actually watched it with Pete, and I noticed in that screening, the movie ended with Joy's last line, where she says, "After all, Riley's 12 now, what could happen?" And it just seems so teed up to go into the teenage years. And so I started there. I'm like, I think I'll explore Riley as a teenager. And so I immediately met with experts from the first film, and new ones too, that know what happens in the brain when we're teenagers. And it's a lot. We go through a lot. I mean, anybody who's gone through it, knows it's a very memorable time. And there's a lot that goes on in our brains at that time. So we thought it would be, I told Pete, I'm like, I feel like this gives us everything we want in a Pixar film. Like it has a potential for a lot of drama, a lot of emotion, and I can make it really funny. And you kind of need all those things for a Pixar film. And so I knew Riley becoming a teenager and dealing with new emotions would be what I wanted to deal with. And so I made a list of all of the possible emotions I thought could show up. And I remember on that list, anxiety was there. And I remember making a big list. I kind of stood back and looked at it, and I was immediately drawn to anxiety. And this was January of 2020, so this is pre-pandemic. And even in the research I was doing, I was looking at what teens are going through today. I obviously need to look at my own experience as a teenager, but that was a long time ago. So I want to find similarities between what I went through and what kids today are going through. And at that time, anxiety was on the rise in teenagers, especially teenage girls. And it's something I can relate to, not only being a teenager back in the day, but also even now. That was pre-pandemic. And so we had already kind of decided that would be a good direction to go in, is to do a movie that had Riley's anxiety coming in and taking over. Then the pandemic happened, and if anything, it made what was already a problem even worse, not only in teens, but in kids and adults too. So we just thought this would be something that the world could relate to, and a story worth telling.
Inside Out 2 does a great job of visualizing abstract and complex concepts of the human mind. How did you do that?
Yeah, it's a fun world to play in, but you got to make sure you're doing it right, and you're being accurate to what actually happens in our brains. And Riley is now a teenager, so I wanted to have her deal with more complex emotions. And so, we want to make sure this film works for everybody, including kids. So we're like, how do we make sure that they can follow along? I think we learned this even on the first film, that kids get more than we think. And boy, I mean, even today's kids get things more than I did as a teenager. Like, I didn't even know what anxiety was in terms of like hearing that word, but I feel like it's out there more in teenagers and kids' vocabularies. I feel like they're just a little bit more emotionally attuned than I certainly was growing up. But we're always kind of making sure that what we're watching is makes sense and is easily understood by everyone, including kids.
And what about the sense of self?
Oh yeah, the sense of self was that took us a long time to figure out. It was really complicated. We do multiple screenings at the studio. We always are like writing a script, and then we're storyboarding it, and we cut it together with temporary music and sound effects and voices and all that. And we watch the movie in a rough state. And part of it is to look at what you're talking about. Like, can you follow it? Do you care? Are you emotionally invested? I remember early on, I got a lot of notes that was too complicated and hard to follow because there was too many elements. I think that's pretty standard. You kind of start, in the beginning, you're just trying to come up with a lot like great ideas, and you end up getting excited about a lot of them, and you put them all in the movie, and then it's overwhelming to the audience. And then I spend the rest of the years making the movie pulling things out, and trying to simplify. And the sense of self was very complicated in the beginning. It used to involve the personality islands, because we thought, oh, that helps make you who you are, your sense of self. But one, it was something I'd already seen before. I've already seen the islands, and I wanted something new. And two, it was really complex, because we also involved the belief strings too. We're like, what if it's just the beliefs? What if it's just the beliefs that make up the sense of self?
How did you create the character of anxiety so that she was both an antagonist and a positive character?
Yeah, I always pitched anxiety as a character that comes in and takes over the headquarters, because I thought that would be very different from the first film, and also true to what it feels like to have anxiety. Sometimes it can take over, and it can shove all of your emotions, like it can repress your emotions away and take over. So I always pitched it like that. I was influenced by the movie All About Eve, if you're familiar with that film. And she started out very antagonistic in the beginning. Remember, I was saying we do multiple screenings. Well, in the first few screenings, she was very antagonistic and was very too much of a cardboard cookie cutter villain, and she was too mean, and you're like, why is she doing what she's doing? I don't understand her motivation. Even with an antagonist, you want to be excited to cut back to them, and I wasn't excited to cut back to anxiety. I'm like, I should be excited. I should be like, oh cool, another anxiety scene, right? And I wasn't in the beginning, and I think we leaned into our experts, and we asked them what's its purpose? What's its motivation? Why is it? Why do we have it? And Lisa D'Amour, she was on one of the experts on the film, and she said, well, it's there because it's trying to protect us. And fear is the feeling you get of a known threat, and anxiety is the fear of a perceived threat. I think there might be a tiger around the corner, right? And it's trying to save you from the tigers that are hiding in the shadows. But it can go too far. It can think that there's tigers everywhere, and it can keep you in fight or flight constantly. And so when we made the switch into why she's doing what she's doing was for protection of Riley, then things started to work. I always said, anxiety loves Riley just as much as joy does. She's just trying to protect her. It's coming from a place of love. And they're two parents arguing over how to best take care of their child, but they're both doing it from a place of love. When we did that, suddenly the character, you could understand the character, why she was doing what she was doing. She became more empathetic. You may not agree with her or like everything she was doing, but at least you understood where she was coming from. And she was more of a fun character that you wanted to cut to then, you know? And so things really started to work out once we made that slight switch. It's all about finding the right balance. That's having a healthy balance of your emotions.
What is your personal definition of animation?
Oh, what's my personal definition of animation? I think my favorite thing about animation is also what I love about puppetry. I love giving life to something that doesn't have life to begin with. I think that's why you fall in love with animation. You know, it's a little bit like that title of the Disney book, The Illusion of Life. It really means a lot. It's what's so magical about it. You could take anything and you could give it life and a personality. And you know, I'm a huge fan of the Muppets. And like, look at Kermit. He's just a piece of felt and ping pong balls, yet he's got such humanity and a soul. You know, the Muppets are really fun, but they're also incredibly soulful creatures and beings that I can relate to. And I think that's the power of animation, is that we can give life to anything, and it's really magic.
Thank you very, very much.
Thanks, man. Thank you so much.